So let's go back to our text. We'll start with 3:1. We're really just going to be reading or going through 3:1 today. So let's read that once more. It says there, finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. To write the same things to you is no trouble to me and is safe for you. So let's use our basic Bible reading principles as we dive into this text. So we first of all you observe it, right? That's the first thing. You observe, interpret, and then apply. So as for me, as in observing this, the first thing that came, and the most obvious thing that to notice in this verse is the first word. It says finally. Uh, Now that finally, when you see that, you usually think, oh, okay, it's the end, or it's about to come to an end, um, or it's the climax. This is the climax of Paul's letter to the Philippians. But in this case, that's not true, okay? Because there is another finally in chapter 4, verse 8. If you check out chapter 4, verse 8, you'll see it again, finally. So really, if there's two finallys like that, which one is final? When you see that and you see see it in context and you read it in context, then this can't mean finally. This can't mean the climax or the ending. So what we do in that case is we do some word study. So we look at that word finally. We look at the original word used for it in Greek. And then we kind of refer to that word in the Greek, and we from there we kind of look at the context, where it's at, where it's placed in the verse or in the chapter, and then from there we'll interpret what that finally means. So the Greek word used for that word finally is the word loipos, and it doesn't really refer to the climax or the end, in this case of the letter, but it refers to the rest. Okay, it refers to the rest or everything else. So instead of finally, if we were to paraphrase the more accurate, I guess, accurate translation of that word loipos, I'm going to use Piper's translation here. He translated it as, instead of finally, Piper translates it as far as the rest is concerned. Okay, as far as the rest is concerned, talking about the rest of the things that Paul is going to say, or he could also be referring to the rest of the things that he already said. But that's what that finally means. As far as the rest is concerned, or as far as everything else that I'm talking about or I'm going to talk about is concerned, or as far as everything else that I've already talked about is concerned. Okay? So the reason why it's translated like that is because this word, the word used here for finally, this loipos, is also used in a couple of other instances in the Philippians. So, for example, Philippians 1:13 says, so that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest, that's the loipos, to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. So when you read that, and you read loipos in that, it's not the end, it's not climax, it's talking about everybody else or the rest, right? Or in Philippians 4:3, yes, I ask you also, true companion, help these women who have labored side by side with me in the gospel with Clement and the rest of my fellow workers whose names are in the book of life. So same thing in that verse. The rest doesn't mean the end, doesn't mean the climax. It means everybody else. It means the rest, right? When we go back to our text in Philippians 3:1, when it says, finally, again, it's talking about as far as the rest is concerned, as far as whatever I've told you, whatever I'm going to tell you is concerned. So right now, what is he trying to tell us? What is he trying to draw our attention to? There are three things that we can find in this verse that he's trying to draw our attention to, that Paul is trying to draw our attention to. So when he says, finally, my brothers, the first thing he's trying to draw our attention to is what? To rejoice in the Lord. Okay, that's the first thing. He wants to draw our attention to that. So as far as everything is concerned, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. All right, that's the number one. Number two, as far as everything is concerned, or as far as the rest is concerned, I'm going to write the same things to you. All right, that's the second one. I'm going to write the same things to you, and it is no trouble to me. Okay, that's number two. All right, and the third one is, you probably guessed it, as far as the rest is concerned, and as far as I'm writing and saying the same things to you, all of this will be safe for you. All of this will be good for you. So what we're going to do in the rest of our time is we're going to take up those three. What is Paul trying to say to us as far as the rest of the, the rest of his message is in terms of Philippians 3:1. So first thing he tells us is to, as far as everything else is concerned, as far as the rest is concerned, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord. Now, what does that mean? And why does Paul include it in this chapter, in this phrase in this chapter? Just like what I said earlier, this is probably the most important thing that Paul says in this letter. You could argue that this is the main point of the letter. It's for the Philippian believers to always rejoice in the Lord. Remember where they're at, right? Remember the context, historical context and social context of the Philippian believers. They live in the city where it is inhabited by former Roman soldiers. A lot of pagans live there. So for them to continue in the work of the gospel the way they've been partnered with Paul to do, it's going to be a little difficult to do because it is a place where for sure they will face persecution. For sure they will face rejection. So Paul's message to them, as far as the book is concerned, as far as this letter is concerned, is, hey, yeah, I know it's bad, a situation is bad there, but continue to rejoice in the Lord. That's his main message. That's Paul's main message here. And if you read prior to chapter 3, verse 1, he has mentioned rejoicing a few times, right? He has mentioned it in chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, chapter 1, verse 18, chapter 1, verses 25 to 26. If you go to chapter 2, he's mentioned it, chapter 2, verse 2, chapter 2, verse 17, 18, and 19, okay? And in chapter 2, verses 28 and 29. So before he even mentions rejoice in the Lord in chapter 3, verse 1, he's already mentioned it a few other times in the previous two chapters. Now, what I want you guys to do is to look at these verses and see what are the common themes that are associated with them, okay, with these verses. Because from it, we're going to be able to define what Paul meant when he says, rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice in the Lord. So what are those verses again? Chapter 1, verses 4 and 5. I'm just going to read it to you. Okay. Always in every prayer of mine for you all, making my prayer with joy because of your partnership in the gospel from the first day until now. Okay. And then chapter 1, verse 18. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice. Okay, chapter 1, verses 25 to 26. Convinced of this, I know that I will remain and continue with you all for your progress and joy in the faith, so that you may have ample cause to glory in Christ Jesus because of my coming to you again. Okay? And I hope as we're reading this, or you're listing it down, you're trying to look at what are the common things that are in these verses. Let's go to chapter 2, verse 2. Complete my joy by being of the same mind, having the same love, being in full accord and of one mind. So again, he mentions joy or rejoicing. Chapter 2, verses 17 and 18. Even if I am to be poured out as a drink offering upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. 18. Likewise, you should also be glad and rejoice with me. There it is again, rejoicing. And in that context, rejoicing even though he knows he's going to die. All right? 19. I hope in the Lord Jesus to send Timothy to you soon, so that I too may be cheered by good news of you. Cheered, joyful, rejoicing. Right? And last but not least, 28 and 29 in chapter 2. I am the more eager to send him, therefore, that you may rejoice at seeing him again, that I may be less anxious. 29, so receive him in the Lord with all joy and honor such men, talking about Epaphroditus, right? So again, if you look at those verses, what do you think are the common themes associated, or common traits, themes associated with them? Again, if we look at the themes, maybe we'll be able to kind of narrow down what Paul meant in chapter 3, verse 1, to rejoice in the Lord. Okay? So this is what I come up with. Well, let me give you a few minutes. Let me give you a couple of seconds here while I drink my water. So what are the themes? What are the things that are common, okay, in these verses? So if you look at chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, and chapter 1, verse 18, Paul's rejoicing is focused on the sharing of the gospel, or the advance of the gospel. Or we can say, what the common thing here in chapter 1, 4, and 5, and verse 18, is the work, is the common work that he and the Philippian believers sharing. Okay? They're both able to rejoice because of the common work, that they share in advancing or sharing the gospel. That's in chapter 1, 4, and 5, and verse 18. Okay? Then you work your way down. In chapter 1, verse 25 and 26, the rejoicing is focused on the common faith that they have. And if you go back, a few sermons back, you will see that we talked about this before. So they're rejoicing because not just because of the work that they have, but because of the faith that they have in order to do the work. So they're rejoicing in that common work. They're rejoicing also in the common faith. And then for the rest of the verses, chapter 2, verse 2, chapter 2, 17 to 18 and 19, and chapter 2, verse 28 and 29, the rejoicing is focused on their common obedience. Okay? Common obedience, right? So not only do they rejoice because they're doing the same work, and because they have the same faith, but because they all obeyed. All of them. And Paul, again, just like what we took up last week, Paul used Timothy and Epaphroditus as an example, the excellent examples, remember, from last week's sermon. So those are the things, the common work, common faith, and common obedience. So given those clues, okay, as to where Paul mentioned rejoicing, and then here in chapter 3 where he's mentioning, finally, as for everything else, as for the rest, rejoice in the Lord. I think these are the clues that we have in order to be able to interpret what rejoicing in the Lord means here in chapter 3, verse 1. So I would say, and this is how I concluded it, based on our clues, okay, of common work, common faith, and common obedience, that the rejoicing in the Lord that Paul is referring to here in 3 verse 1 is a rejoicing in the faithfulness of God to enable their obedience by faith in order to accomplish the work of the gospel. Say that again. The rejoicing in the Lord, I think, here in chapter 3, verse 1, is a rejoicing in God's faithfulness to enable obedience by faith in order to accomplish the work of the gospel. Okay? Or it could also mean that since the work of advancing the gospel is no walk in the park, it is hard work. We talked about this 2-3 sermons ago, and we're going to see it in Paul's warnings here in verse 2 of chapter 3. It's sharing the gospel, being able to advance the gospel is no walk in the park. It is hard work. The only way to persevere is to count everything as joy. Okay? That's why he says joy in the Lord. Not just because he's rejoicing because of God's faithfulness, but he is telling them to rejoice because the work of the gospel is going to be hard. Well, let's look at a verse in James 1, verses 2 to 8. It says here, count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet what? Trials of various kinds. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, okay, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. So when he talks about finally, okay, again, finally, as for the rest, as for everything else that I've said, or as for everything else that I'm going to say right now, rejoice in the Lord, right? And that rejoicing in the Lord can mean a couple of things. Rejoice in the Lord for his faithfulness to enable the work of obedience in advancing the gospel. Or it could mean rejoice in the Lord because rejoicing or joy in God is what's going to help the Philippian believers and us here right now to persevere, because the advancement of the gospel is hard work. And for some of us, it will be dangerous work, right? It'll be dangerous work. And again, I say that because Paul mentions in chapter 1, verses 28 and 29, that there will be opposition coming. There will be suffering coming when it comes to the work that they're doing in advancing the gospel. Check it out. Philippians 1:28. And not frightened in anything by your, what? Opponents. There you go. There's opposition coming. This is a clear sign for them of their destruction, but of your salvation, and that from God. 29. For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake. So not only is the work of the gospel, okay, you can rejoice in it because God enables you to do the work and calls you to be part of the work. You can rejoice in that, but the rejoicing in the Lord also is a, shall we say, like a weapon of ours against opposition, against suffering, which will, for a lot of Christians, is the biggest hindrance for obedience, a biggest hindrance from advancing the gospel, but for sharing the gospel. This is the biggest hindrance for some of us, because there's going to be opposition, there's going to be rejection, there's going to be suffering. What's going to help us overcome that? Rejoice in the Lord. And look what Paul says in chapter 3, verse 2. So after he says, as for everything else, brothers, rejoice in the Lord, look what he says. Look out for dogs. So he's not talking about real dogs, okay? like in the Philippines, you know, in the Philippines, if you grew up in the Philippines, dogs always chase you when you pass by their house, right? Me and my brother used to pass by the dog's house and let them chase us on our bikes. We used to do that for fun. Sometimes we got caught, but sometimes we outrun the dogs. But that's not the dogs that he's talking about. He's not talking about look out for your neighbor's dog. No, he's talking about something else. Look out for the dogs. Look out for the evildoers. And look out for those who mutilate the flesh. So he's warning them. There is going to be opposition. There is going to be suffering. There will be trials on your way to advance, or in advancing the gospel. And it'll come in these forms. That's why you look out for them. Look out for the dogs, evildoers, and those who mutilate the flesh. Now, we're not going to be taking these up for now. Like, who are the dogs? Who are the evildoers? And who are those who mutilate the flesh? We'll do that in the next sermon. But for now, I just want you to see that Paul is warning them, right? He's warning them that these things are coming. Therefore, if these things are coming, how do we overcome? As for everything else that I have said, as for the rest that I have said, Paul says, rejoice in the Lord, right? So either way we interpret rejoice in the Lord, okay? Rejoicing in the Lord in this context is Paul encouraging believers to continue with the work of the gospel. Okay? Either way we interpret it, that's Paul's main purpose. continue the work of the gospel. Not because you're in it, you'll see the faithfulness of God, and therefore we can rejoice, but in it, there will also be, when I say in it, I'm talking about the work of the gospel, there will also be trials and opposition along the way. And the only way to overcome is if we have that joy, if we can rejoice even in the midst of opposition and suffering. And just like I said in the beginning, this is probably the hardest thing for me to feel right now. That joy in the midst of whatever it is that I'm feeling right now in terms of my spiritual dryness or my spiritual, shall we say, depression. Um, because you see, I don't know if you guys will understand this, but when we talk about joy in the Lord or to rejoice in the Lord, is a fight. You don't just, um, you can't just force yourself to rejoice if you're not joyful. It is always a fight, and it's a fight of faith. Because when Paul says rejoice in the Lord, means in the Lord, because you believe in the Lord, that you know that there's hope in the Lord, that you know that whatever it is that you're facing right now is temporary, and that God will make everything right in the end. If you believe that, then you can rejoice. That's why it's a fight of faith, because for us, sometimes when these things come, whether it be discouragements or whether it be, just like what I'm saying, spiritual dryness or spiritual depression, that's the first thing that we see. Right? And sometimes it clouds our sight. It blocks our focus on God. It blocks our focus that, yeah, these things are here right now in front of our face, but really, if we remain focused, we can still see God at the end of the tunnel, and that He's always going to be there, and that He's always going to be faithful. So that in that hope, even though there's these things in front of us right now, whatever it is for you, okay, I'm saying for me it's the spiritual depression. Whatever it is for you, if you have that kind of focus and that kind of hope and that kind of faith, you'll still be able to rejoice in the midst of these trials, in the midst of this suffering, because I know my God will help me overcome it. Again, as of right now, my struggle is to rejoice, is to feel content with what I'm experiencing right now, because I know that God is using this to strengthen me. But even though I know that, there's this thing pulling me still, that there is this struggle between the flesh, a struggle between my mind and my heart, to be able to continue to rejoice. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for that struggle. Some of the reasons are self-inflicted. Some of it is, I know it's my fault for sure. Like when I say self-inflicted, like all the distractions that I allow in my day-to-day walk is causing this thing to kind of make me lose focus on God. Whatever those distractions are. For me, there's a lot. It could be Netflix, it could be YouTube, it could be mountain biking. I wasn't able to go yesterday, but it could be that. It could be that distraction. Just because I wasn't able to go yesterday, I want to go. I want to go get out there and ride my bike. But that could be a distraction as well. So some of it is that. Some of it is my fault. But some of it obviously is caused by the enemy of our faith. In 1st or 2nd Peter, when he talks about the roaring lion that's always waiting to devour you, he's not going to devour you as in your flesh. He's not going to eat you. He wants to destroy your faith. That's why he's always whispering and whispering and tempting you to doubt God. But sometimes that's what it is. And sometimes in our weakness, we listen to it. When you listen to it, you get depressed. And that depression usually lasts a while. It comes suddenly, like a tide, it comes suddenly, but it usually lasts a while. The more you listen to it, the more it kind of bogs you down. That's why Scripture says, don't just keep focusing on God. And Paul says, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord, even though these things are coming. You know that these things will come, these trials, these tribulations, these dogs, these evildoers, these people who mutilate the flesh. These will come. But in it, continue to rejoice in the Lord. Continue to focus on God and be able to rejoice in the faithfulness of God to help us overcome these things. And right now, that's me. Um, but again, this fight ultimately boils down to faith. Okay? There's nothing we can do. You can try to read your Bible all you want. You can try to do that to strengthen, reinforce the promises of God in you. You can try to do that, but really it's up to, by God's grace, to strengthen our faith. The disciples asked for that. I think in Mark chapter 5 or chapter 10, the disciples asked, what if I'm lacking faith? Ask for more. And that's what I'm doing right now. Because right now I can feel that my faith is kind of weak. That's why I'm feeling, this sluggishness when it comes to my spiritual walk. But again, my hope is that God's power will be made manifest in my weakness. So I go to this verse and these passages in 2 Corinthians. Check it out. 2 Corinthians 12, 9 to 10. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Verse 10, for the sake of Christ, then I am content, happy, rejoicing. I'm content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. That's the verse that I kind of hold on to in times of spiritual dryness, in times of discouragement, because it says there that, man, even in your weakness, you can boast. Why? Because when you are weak, that's when God's power is made perfect in your weakness. Meaning that if we could just surrender our weaknesses to God, right? If we could just surrender, don't take it up, don't carry the weight on our own, cast all our cares, cast all our burdens upon Him, He will show us just how powerful He really is in helping us overcome these weaknesses, so that in our weakness we can still rejoice, right? We can still rejoice. I think it was Jesus also who said in Hebrews, Jesus, for the joy that was set before Him, endured the cross, right? It was the joy that helped Him endure the cross. That's power made manifest or perfected in weakness. At His most vulnerable, when He died on the cross, is God's power most perfected. And we can testify to that, right, as believers, because that's the power that's continually saving us each and every single day. So when you feel this way, or if you are feeling this way, or whatever, you're feeling down or whatever, just think about that. Paul says, as far as everything I've said, as far as the rest of the things that I've said, rejoice in the Lord, even in your trials, even in your tribulations, even in your weaknesses. We can rejoice because we know that we never have to fight spiritual dryness, in my case, or spiritual apathy. We don't have to fight these things alone. We always have God on our side, and He is always there, faithfully and graciously helping us navigate whatever it is that's taking us off the path of obedience to Him. To tell you the truth, this message, I usually write and finish writing my sermons Wednesday night or sometimes Thursday night. But this one, I finished late or early Friday morning, like 4 o'clock in the morning. So I started at around midnight Friday and finished it around 4 o'clock in the morning on Saturday. And the reason is because I keep saying, I keep debating with God whether, man, should I be preaching on this? I can't even apply it to my own life. I shouldn't be preaching on this. How am I supposed to say this to people and encourage them? Meanwhile, I'm going through this, spiritual depression or spiritual dryness. So it's kind of, I kind of put it off from Wednesday night to Thursday night to Friday night. I put it off, and um, God in His grace has, kept telling me over and over again, no, don't worry about it. I will be there with you. And from nothing, I have nothing on this text, like zero idea of how to preach this text. From that to writing it in 4 hours, that's God. That's God's power being perfected in and through my weakness. And so I trust that verse. I trust that that verse can help you out too. If this, whatever it is that's stopping you from obedience, is whatever it is that's stopping you from obedience, just know that God is there, and that His power is made more manifest. The more you surrender to Him in obedience, the more you will see Him work in power. And I was just telling Jesse this again. I'm taking up a lot of time, but I was telling Jesse this morning, that during my praise and worship days, when I used to lead praise and worship, there were days that I didn't want to sing. I just don't want to sing. It's just not in me to sing and be joyful up here singing, trying to lead other people to sing. But it is in the singing that God helped me overcome whatever it is that's stopping me from singing. It is in obedience. The same thing here right now. It is in the obedience. Even though I don't feel like being here right now, there is this trust and this hope that I have that the Lord will work in and through the obedience. Even though I am weak, He will work and He will show His power when it comes to this message kind of reaching those of you who it needs to reach, those of you who are struggling right now with the same thing that I am. Just like what I said, even though I feel this way right now, like I'm not supposed to be speaking on this topic right now, I trust the power of the Lord's words, that this message will make a difference in someone's life and walk as a believer. Because ultimately, it's not up to me to make a difference in your situation or your life, but the power of God is the one that will make a difference. The power of God to work through me for His glory. Okay? So when we look at that first statement, or the first sentence, finally, my brothers, rejoice in the Lord, I think that's what it means. We're able to rejoice despite of, and we're able to rejoice because of. Because of His faithfulness, we're able to rejoice, and we're able to rejoice despite of these things that are coming, trials and tribulations that we're going through right now. That's the first thing. We're already 43 minutes into it. I thought this was going to be short. Second thing that Paul draws our attention to in the text. So after he says finally, or as for the rest, or as for everything else that I've said and going to say, the second thing that he draws our attention to is what? To write the same things to you is no trouble to me. So that's pretty much self-explanatory. Paul is saying, I'm going to be repeating myself in this chapter and the next. I've already said most of these things, but I'm going to repeat myself. And it's no trouble. I'm joyful and happy to repeat myself. Now, what did we learn from that? Repetition, okay, for some of us can sometimes come across as nagging. Okay, when somebody repeats himself, oh man, just shut up. You already said that before. But sometimes you need to hear it over and over and over again for you to get it. That's why Paul is saying, no, I'm going to repeat myself, and there's no trouble. Don't worry, I'm not, this is not hard work for me. I want to repeat myself because sometimes you need it, right? So for some of us, that's how it comes across, as nagging. But for some, it can also be a sign, or for others, it's a sign of urgency. It is a sign of encouragement when somebody repeats himself over and over again. I know some people take it as, oh, you're just nagging me, or some people take it as, you're trying to make me feel bad. No, That's not it. Um, I need to. Sometimes I feel like I need to repeat myself in order for you to to get it. And sometimes I do that in my sermons to make sure that you hear it and that you give idea, that you have an idea of how important that thing is. That's why I keep repeating it over and over again. I think that's what Paul is telling us here as well. Not just in the repeating, but in him saying that there is no trouble for me. Him repeating things is no trouble for him. I know some parents who, when they tell their kid once, twice, they stop. That's it. That's it. I'm not going to say it again. It's tiring to repeat myself. But listen, parents, if you love your children and if you want to discipline your children, repeat yourself. That's the way they're going to learn. For some of our kids, that's the way they're going to learn. Don't get tired of repeating yourself. At the same time, when you repeat yourself, say it with some authority. So maybe that will get them to listen. But don't get tired of repeating yourself. Don't get tired of teaching. Don't get tired of discipling your own children. That's what Paul is doing here with us. That's why he will be repeating some of the things that he's already covered in this letter. Right? In the next chapter, or even in this chapter, he's going to be repeating some of it. And I think the hope is that, we as listeners will not take it as Paul nagging us, but instead, we'll take it as, Paul helping us in our growth, the way he's helping the Philippian believers in their growth and joy in the faith. So when he says that, I'm going to repeat myself, just listen to him. Okay? So same thing with us here. When we have to review or when we have to repeat something over and over again, I hope that you take that to mean that whatever that thing is that's being repeated is important and is for your own good. Please do not shut it out. Okay? Instead, just continue to listen and meditate on it. And this leads us to the last thing that Paul says. Okay? What's the last thing that Paul draws our attention to? As for everything else that I've said, what did he say? This is safe for you. Or simply these warnings and these repetitions of warnings is good for you. Safe for you. Now, I know, again, some of us, we hate that, right? When I was a kid, I would rather be spanked than be talked to, right? When we get called, when we do something wrong and we get called and say, okay, that's it, you get 10 lashes or whatever it is that you call it, 10 spankings, right? I would rather have that than I hear my dad call, okay, come in the room, I need to talk to you. Oh, that's worse for me. And I think for my kids, it's the same thing. It's worse for my kids when I say, come, I need to talk to you. It's easier for them to get a spanking because that spanking will last, 5 minutes? But the talking can last hours. But really, it's the talks that kind of get through to us. And that's what Paul is saying to us here. Don't shut out the repetitions. Don't shut out the warnings. Don't shut out the teachings or repetitions of teachings because it is safe for you. Let's not have this attitude of pride, saying to ourselves, I've heard all that before. Yeah, I know. And I hear a lot of kids saying that. I know, but they never do it. They just know, but they never do it. So when it's like that, repeat yourself as a parent, but as a Christian listening to these messages, instead of shutting it out, rejoice that someone is taking the time to tell you these things over and over again until you get it. I'm rejoicing for that because there are people who have repeated, not just my parents, but even my wife have repeated things over and over to me until I got it. And I'm thankful and I rejoice in that they did that they had the patience to do that with me. Hopefully, it's the same for you. That there you have that, rejoicing attitude instead of an attitude of pride that somebody's repeating these things to you until you finally get it, because it is for your own good. It is safe for you. It reminds me of Hebrews 12, 5-11. Let's read it. And have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons, right? My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. It is for discipline that you have to endure. That's the verse that I really like. It is for discipline that you have to endure. Endure what? Endure the pain of these repetitions. Endure the pain of the spankings. Endure the pain of the same thing, hearing the same thing over and over again. Endure that because it is for discipline that you have to endure that. Why? Because God is treating you as sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? If you are left without discipline in which all have participated, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Besides this, we have had earthly fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them all. Shall we not much more be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they, our earthly fathers, disciplined us for a short time, as it seemed best to them. But he disciplines us for our good. This is safe for you, that we may share in his holiness. Wow. I love that verse. That verse has helped me a lot. Every time my dad, or my mom tells me something that I've already heard before, but haven't really listened to, or haven't really learned, I always listen to that verse, to that verse when it says, "It is for discipline that you have to endure, because these are the things that will help you grow. These are the things that are good for you. It is safe for you and for those who are being trained by it." That's what it is. Sometimes discipline is painful, but again, it is for our own good. So let me just summarize it. Okay, what is Paul telling the Philippian believers right now in chapter 3? As for everything else that I've said, as for everything else I'm about to say, first of all, rejoice in the Lord. Rejoice in the Lord, and what? Rejoice in the fact that I'm saying these things to you over and over and over again. Why? Because it is for your own good. And I'm not getting tired of repeating myself. To repeat myself is of no trouble to me. It is safe for you. We're gonna see that as we continue our journey of the Philippians here in chapter 3. And hopefully you will continue to come back, and you will continue to listen, and you will continue to be blessed by Paul's letter to the Philippians. We're going to stop here for now. Okay? I just ask that you continue to pray for me and for the rest of our leaders and our members, especially those who are going through spiritual apathy, spiritual depression, discouragement, whatever it is that people are going through. Pray for them. Call them up. Say hi and how are you doing? And, can I pray for you? And what are you going through right now? Maybe I'm able to encourage and help through prayer. Call them up, and hopefully we can get through this. First of all, with God's faithfulness and power, and with the unity that He has given us through the Holy Spirit and through our faith. So thank God for this message. I pray that you were blessed by it, and that you were helped by it as much as it has helped me. All right? So bow down our heads. Let's pray.
The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift His countenance upon you and give you peace.